Have you ever wondered why some companies create employee handbooks that read like comedy scripts while others craft policies so absurd they make headlines? Well, the answer isn't incompetence. Instead, top organizations know how to write handbooks that either protect their business or accidentally become viral sensations for all the wrong reasons. So, in this video, I'm going to reveal the most ridiculous employee handbook policies that have ever been written, and show you how these corporate disasters teach us about the inner workings of modern workplace culture. This isn't just about laughing at bad policies. It's about understanding how a simple document can transform from a protective shield into a legal landmine that threatens entire organizations. But first, let me give you an example so you know that employee handbook failures are actually everywhere. In 2025, we're living through what experts are calling the Great Handbook Crisis. Companies are creating policies so outdated and legally problematic that they're unknowingly setting themselves up for massive compliance disasters. That's because what seems like a boring administrative document is actually one of the most powerful tools in corporate America. Before, I used to think employee handbooks were just collections of rules about dress codes and vacation days. My perspective looked like this. After diving deep into the world of corporate policy disasters, I discovered something incredible. These documents aren't just guidelines. They're legally binding contracts that can make or break entire organizations. The handbook we're about to examine was created by one of the world's largest companies, and it's so extreme that employment lawyers use it as a cautionary tale. This particular policy manual has become legendary in legal circles, not because it's effective, but because it demonstrates how corporate paranoia can create workplace conditions that border on the absurd. Here's the thing about employee handbooks that nobody tells you. They exist in a strange space between corporate protection and employee rights. When companies get this balance wrong, they don't just create bad policies. They create policies so ridiculous that they become internet legends. What I'm going to show you today is how one company's attempt to prevent theft led to the creation of workplace rules so restrictive that they essentially turned their facilities into corporate prisons. We're talking about policies that control what employees can drink, what they can wear, and even how they can style their hair. But here's what makes this story fascinating. These aren't just random corporate overreach examples. They're symptoms of a much larger problem with how modern businesses approach employee relations. When fear drives policy creation, the results can be both legally questionable and utterly ridiculous. Let me take you inside the world of Amazon's warehouse operations, where loss prevention policies have evolved into something that employment experts describe as dehumanizing. Picture this. You're starting your shift at one of the world's most advanced fulfillment centers. Before you can step onto the warehouse floor, you need to remove your watch, leave your smartphone in your car, and make sure you're not wearing any lipstick. Why? Because Amazon has implemented a policy so comprehensive that warehouse workers are forbidden from bringing any personal items onto the floor that the company actually sells. And since Amazon sells almost everything, this creates a workplace environment where employees can't chew gum, can't wear cosmetics, and can only drink water from clear bottles so security personnel can inspect the contents. Think about that for a moment. We're talking about a policy that requires grown adults to drink only water, and only from transparent containers, so corporate security can literally see through their beverages to make sure they're not smuggling anything. No soda, no tea, no lemonade, just water in a clear bottle under constant surveillance. The Amazon handbook doesn't stop there. The clothing restrictions have become so extensive that observers joke that clothing itself is still permitted, but maybe not for much longer. This represents the extreme end of corporate control, where loss prevention measures have evolved into something that resembles prison regulations more than workplace policies. What makes this particularly interesting from a legal perspective is how these policies highlight the tension between corporate interests and basic worker dignity. Employment lawyers have noted that while companies absolutely have legitimate interests in preventing theft, Amazon's approach may cross the line into excessive surveillance and control. But Amazon isn't the only company that's created handbook policies worthy of mockery. Let me tell you about a French government minister who demanded that her staff stand whenever she walked by. Or the Norwegian call center that installed flashing lights that would activate if employees spent more than 8 minutes away from their desks, including bathroom breaks. These aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a pattern where organizations create policies that reveal fundamental misunderstandings about employee relations and basic human dignity. The Norwegian call center example is particularly telling because it shows how technology can be used to create surveillance systems that monitor the most basic human needs. Then there's Abercrombie & Fitch, the clothing retailer that became notorious for creating a detailed look policy guideline that specified exactly which haircuts were acceptable for employees. We're talking about a company that required hair to appear sun-kissed with subtle highlighting, while forbidding anything they deemed too extreme or involving unnatural bleaching. The specificity of these appearance requirements reveals something deeper about corporate culture. When companies start dictating not just what employees wear, but how they style their hair and even the subtle highlighting techniques they can use, we've moved far beyond reasonable workplace standards into the realm of personal control that many legal experts consider problematic. What's fascinating about these examples is how they demonstrate the evolution of employee handbooks from simple policy documents into comprehensive control mechanisms. The Amazon warehouse policies, the French minister's standing requirements, the Norwegian bathroom surveillance system, and the Abercrombie hair guidelines all share a common thread. They treat employees as potential threats rather than valuable team members. This shift in perspective has created a new category of workplace policies that employment lawyers describe as legally questionable at best and potentially discriminatory at worst. When companies start implementing rules that control basic human behaviors like drinking water, using the bathroom, or styling personal appearance, they're entering territory that courts have increasingly found problematic. The legal implications of these handbook disasters extend far beyond their comedic value. In 2025, the regulatory landscape for employee handbooks has become more complex than ever, with updates to labor laws, anti-discrimination policies, and wage transparency requirements that make outdated or excessive policies direct threats to business survival. What we're seeing with these ridiculous handbook examples is actually a window into how modern corporations struggle to balance control with compliance, security with dignity, and efficiency with basic human rights. The consequences of these handbook failures aren't just embarrassing headlines or viral social media posts. They're creating real legal disasters that are destroying companies from the inside out. When the National Labor Relations Board started examining workplace policies in 2024, they discovered something shocking. Multiple companies were found guilty of creating rules so overbroad that they actually violated federal labor law. Picture this scenario. Your company creates what seems like a reasonable policy requiring employees to communicate respectfully and professionally. Sounds harmless, right? Wrong. The NLRB ruled that these types of policies were so vague and sweeping that they could be interpreted as illegally prohibiting workers from discussing wages, working conditions, or other protected activities. This is where handbook disasters get really expensive. We're not talking about minor compliance issues anymore. We're talking about federal violations that can result in massive fines, lengthy legal battles, and permanent damage to company reputations. The ripple effects are incredible. But here's where things get even more interesting. While some companies are creating policies so restrictive they border on authoritarian control, others have gone in the complete opposite direction. They've turned their employee handbooks into creative masterpieces that have become more famous than their actual products. Netflix completely revolutionized the employee handbook game by creating what they call their culture deck. Instead of a boring document filled with legal jargon and restrictive policies, Netflix created a 129-slide presentation that reads more like a corporate manifesto than a traditional handbook. The Netflix approach is brilliant because it flips the entire concept on its head. Rather than focusing on what employees can't do, they built their handbook around freedom, responsibility, and high performance. They treat their employees like adults who can make intelligent decisions rather than potential criminals who need constant surveillance. What makes the Netflix handbook so effective is how it addresses the fundamental problem with most corporate policies. Instead of creating rules to control behavior, they established principles to guide decision-making. The difference is profound, and it shows up in everything from employee retention to company performance. Then there's Zappos, which took handbook innovation to another level entirely. They created an employee handbook in comic book format, complete with superhero characters and storylines that explain company policies through entertaining narratives. Their approach recognizes something that most companies completely miss. If you want people to actually read and follow your policies, you need to make them engaging. The Zappos comic book handbook features a grandmother explaining to her grandson how to play nice as a way to communicate all the boring legal requirements they're mandated to include. It's genius because it takes the driest, most tedious corporate content and transforms it into something people actually want to read. Valve Software created another legendary handbook example that went viral for entirely different reasons than the Amazon disaster. Their 56-page employee handbook is filled with hilarious illustrations and embodies what they call their flatland organizational structure. The document is so entertaining that people actively seek it out online, not because they work for Valve, but because it's genuinely enjoyable to read. These innovative approaches reveal something crucial about modern workplace culture. The companies creating engaging, respectful handbooks are the same ones consistently rated as best places to work. Meanwhile, the organizations implementing surveillance-heavy, restrictive policies are dealing with high turnover, low morale, and increasing legal challenges. The contrast couldn't be more stark. On one side, you have Amazon workers who can't drink anything except water from clear bottles under security surveillance. On the other side, you have Netflix employees operating under a culture of freedom and responsibility, where they're trusted to make decisions aligned with company goals. This divide is creating two completely different categories of workplace experience in 2025. Some employees are working in environments that treat them as valuable contributors whose judgment and autonomy are respected. Others are working under policies so restrictive they feel more like corporate detention centers than professional workplaces. The legal ramifications of this divide are becoming increasingly severe. Courts are starting to recognize that excessive workplace surveillance and control can create hostile work environments that violate employee rights. The clear bottled water policy at Amazon, for example, raises serious questions about whether security measures can become so invasive that they cross legal boundaries. Employment lawyers are seeing a dramatic increase in cases where outdated or excessive handbook policies become the central evidence in discrimination lawsuits, wrongful termination claims, and hostile workplace allegations. What companies think are protective policies are actually creating massive legal vulnerabilities. The technology factor is making everything more complicated. With artificial intelligence increasingly used in hiring, monitoring, and performance reviews, companies need handbook policies that address these emerging technologies. New York City recently implemented laws requiring bias audits for AI systems used in hiring decisions. Companies without proper AI policies in their handbooks are sitting ducks for discrimination claims. Remote work has created another layer of handbook complexity that most organizations haven't addressed. Many handbooks still lack clear policies on remote work expectations, expense reimbursements, or confidentiality protocols for home offices. These omissions are creating legal ambiguities that put employers at serious disadvantage in workplace disputes. The stakes have never been higher because we're living in an era where a single poorly written handbook policy can destroy decades of business success. So there you have it. From Amazon's dystopian water bottle surveillance to Netflix's revolutionary culture deck, we've seen how employee handbooks can either become corporate disasters or brilliant cultural innovations. The lesson here isn't just about avoiding ridiculous policies. It's about understanding that in 2025, your employee handbook isn't just a document anymore. It's a reflection of your entire organizational philosophy and a legal contract that can make or break your business. The companies treating employees like potential criminals are creating legal landmines while destroying their own workplace culture. Meanwhile, the organizations building handbooks around trust and respect are seeing better performance, higher retention, and fewer legal headaches. The choice is yours, but remember, Every policy you write is sending a message about what kind of employer you really are. If you're responsible for your company's employee handbook, take a hard look at what message you're actually sending. Are you creating the next viral disaster that employment lawyers will use as a cautionary tale? Or are you building something that attracts and retains the talent your business needs to succeed? Because in today's world, there's no middle ground. Your handbook is either protecting your organization, or it's quietly setting you up for the kind of legal catastrophe that makes headlines for all the wrong reasons.